The presidential elections in Madrid took place today. And as we go to air, Sid Lowe joins us. We don't know the winner, but it looks like the winner is going to be Florentino Perez. So I don't want to go into the complications of the recount because that's going to take forever, Sid. Let's just assume that Florentino Perez has won it. What does that mean?
Right, well, it means a number of things. The first thing I think is that the exit polls suggest that he's won it with around about 65% of the vote, maybe a fraction higher, maybe a fraction lower. We're still waiting on that. I think that would suggest that he has a pretty strong mandate to continue and to go ahead with his plans to sell off 5% of the club, and from that to see if he can begin this process towards changing the model of the club. So it wouldn't be a model of membership-owned club as such. It would be done in a different way. I think actually 65%, it sounds a very big win, and I suppose on the face of it is a very big win, but I think it's a surprisingly significant result for Enrique Riquelme, a guy that basically no one had heard of 3 weeks ago. For him to get around about 35%, and let's see what the final figures are, I think is quite significant. I think it does suggest a growing... I wouldn't call it an opposition to Florentino Perez, but at least an alternative to Florentino Perez. But the bottom line is, it gives him the mandate to continue. It keeps him in power. He's already been in power, of course, for 23 years with a gap in the middle between 2006 and 2009. It means that he can go ahead with this plan to change the structure and the model of the club. It also means in the immediate short term, Dan, that we will see Konate and Dumfries come into the club. It means we will almost certainly see Jose Mourinho announced probably tomorrow, on Monday. And, of course, what Florentino also said was that he's going to make a bid of at least 150 million euros for a Galactico on Tuesday.
Which is going to be Elise, Sid, yes?
Well, this is what we believe, but of course Florentino Perez, the curious thing about this was that this was on a TV show with a presenter called Iker Jimenez, and when Jimenez suggested Elise, Florentino denied it. But the very strong evidence points at it being Elise. I don't know if Florentino denied it because he was kind of caught on the hop and kind of didn't know what to say, or if he just doesn't want to point it out yet. But the other thing is, we should remember here that, of course, this is Florentino Perez saying that he's going to make a bid, not him promising that he will get the player, but promising that he will make the bid.
Who's going to leave, Sid?
This is a very good question. Who's going to leave? Because, of course, if you look at the structure at Real Madrid, bringing in Elise isn't necessarily a problem because, of course, he plays on the right-hand side, and on the face of it, you could say Elise, Vinicius, Mbappe. That is a hell of a forward line, isn't it? And anyone would want that. But I think there are some doubts about a lot of players. Obviously, we know that Carvajal is going. We know that Dani Ceballos is going. Those two maybe don't matter enormously, although Carvajal is the club captain. I think there is a doubt about what happens up front. And Florentino, during this presidential campaign, which, by the way, I think has been really good for Real Madrid in a way, and it's certainly been good for the fans and for journalists and everyone around, because we're hearing from Florentino Perez, and we've not really heard from him for around about a decade. So we're hearing from him in a different context, and he's having to answer certain questions. Now, that's not to say you always get clear answers, and that's natural, I think, when you're the president of a club. But one of the things he's been asked about was about Vinicius. He's talked about wanting to keep him. He's talked about saying that he doesn't think that there's any hurry, but Vinicius is going into the final year of his contract. So if your question, Dan, is essentially asking me which of the big two is leaving, and I suspect it kind of was, then right now, of course, logic suggests we're talking more about Vinicius than about Mbappe.
So, Sid, on the face of it, this is exactly what the fans wanted. Fresh faces coming in, a mix-up. But the problem is the core problems are still there, if you believe what we've seen over the last few months with those big players.
Right, OK, so the core problems are still there. Well, at the moment they are. But, of course, let's present the kind of the optimistic Real Madrid fans' view at the moment. The optimistic Real Madrid fans' view is, OK, the core problems maybe are there. For example, some of the gaps in the squad, that there isn't a ball-playing number 5, there isn't someone to build the play, that the problems with Mbappe and Vinicius occupying similar space, the problems with dressing room divisions, some of those issues there about how there hasn't been a solidarity amongst the squad, how there's been very, very significant divides, and all of those things are there right now. Now, the optimistic view, though, says, but those things change when the manager is no longer Arbeloa or Xabi Alonso. Those things change when maybe 2 or 3 key players depart and maybe some other players come in who perhaps have leadership qualities. Those things change in theory when you bring in Jose Mourinho. And I think one of the big things about Mourinho's arrival, and I do genuinely think that Mourinho's arrival can partly be defined or explained by nostalgia, by the idea that he made Madrid tough and aggressive, and they went and took Barcelona on. And I think that's what people want. And I think the belief is that he partly did that because he also took on some of the egos in the dressing room, because he was a leader. Now, this is not to say that Mourinho is the same guy he was in 2013 when he left. You know, it's 13 years have passed, and I think actually in some ways he's a mellower figure than he was then. But I think that if you like, that nostalgic view is we need someone that really imposes in the dressing room, and whether or not this is still true, the image of Mourinho is of precisely that kind of personality.
Why would these players listen to Jose Mourinho?
Well, players haven't listened to Jose Mourinho over the last few years, I wouldn't say. And the style of football that we saw when he was Roma manager, they were real disciplined, the players were real disciplined. He spent most of his time arguing with fourth officials, most of his time arguing with press, most of his time arguing with referees in car parks. That's the Jose Mourinho that we've seen over the last 13 years, or maybe the last 10 years. He went from Roma, he's been into Turkey, he hasn't done particularly well. He did okay at Manchester United, but he isn't the same manager. He isn't the same character he was when he went to Chelsea, when he was at Inter Milan, where he was dominant. And when he made substitutions and when he said things, everybody listened to him. Now, when he says things, people don't listen to him quite so much.
When you think of the best man management of this generation, Carlo Ancelotti has to be number one.
Yep.
He couldn't get these players in the end to listen to him.
Correct. So why would Jose Mourinho?
What a good question.
If only you'd asked it. There really isn't a positive answer to that, because including everybody on our show, I haven't heard anybody turn around and say, this is it. This guy's going to sort it out. We know what he's like. We know what he can do. You know, Sid's been talking about, if you're an ultra positive Madrid fan, he just listed about 4 ifs. And one of the biggest ifs is, will they listen to Mourinho? So you'd have to say probably not. Why? No question, this guy's mellowed. The guy who came in the last time maybe could have sorted it out, but he isn't the same guy. And so it's another if. Can he do it? Every time we sit here and we're talking about Areola, for example, going into Liverpool, we know what he's going to try and do. We know what he's all about. We've got a really good idea of what he's going to try and do. We've got no clue what Mourinho's going to try.
When he went into Real Madrid the first time, he'd had success with in Sporting Lisbon, or Porto, sorry. And then he'd had success with Chelsea. Everywhere he went, he won things. So when he went to Real Madrid, everybody believed everything he said. You know, and the football was much better. He was dominant with the press. Everybody loved what he was saying. You know, you believed him. That's not the case. He's going into a club now having not done too well over the last few years.
Sid, you can write the headlines, can't you, almost already? First couple of months, stern Mourinho, he's getting a song out of this side, and it's when it all starts to fall apart that it's going to be fascinating to see how it all plays out.
Yeah, and it is going to be very interesting to see how this plays out. And I think just to try and answer it in part, at least, one of Stevie's questions there was why would they listen to Mourinho? And I think when we look at the experience of Xabi Alonso, look at the experience of Alvaro Arbeloa, and look at the experience of Ancelotti in the final season, because of course the season before Ancelotti won the Champions League, so I think it would be fair to say he certainly did get a tune out of them then. I think maybe the really big difference with Mourinho is not just about Mourinho, it's about what Mourinho symbolises and what he's got around him. About the fact that this is a manager that, in theory at least, will be given the authority. In theory at least, will be back. This is one of the very few managers that Florentino Perez, the president, has truly believed in, has truly felt a sense of kind of connection with, that he likes that aggressive Mourinho, that he likes that idea of going and taking people on and being tough with it. And I think that one of the differences between Mourinho and Arbeloa and Alonso and Ancelotti, the last 3, is that I think that when Mourinho, for example, let's go to the Clasico from earlier this season. Xabi Alonso takes off Vinicius. Vinicius storms off the pitch and down the tunnel and basically says, well, I won't come back again. Now, Vinicius does eventually apologise, but the dividing lines are opened up then. At that point, there's a real problem. And one of the reasons there was a problem is because Alonso wasn't backed, wasn't given the authority by the club to act. And I think right now, and maybe it will only happen in the short term, because we know the nature of Real Madrid, we know the nature of the environment, But in the short term, at least, if that happened in a Clasico this time round with Mourinho, and Mourinho decides, right, Vinicius sits on the bench for the next 4 games, I think he would be backed in it, and in a way that Alonso wasn't. And so if we're looking for again, to use the optimistic view of this, if we're looking for that optimistic view of it from a Real Madrid fan's point of view, I think the optimistic view would be the difference is Mourinho comes with authority.
Good man, Sid. Thank you very much. When are you coming to the States?
Next week on Thursday.
Lovely. Good man. Safe trip.